Welcome to Legal Action. My name is David Siegel. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about debt relief law, how we became debt-ridden Americans, how we find our way out of debt, and how we rebuild ourselves once we've eliminated the debt. Joining me today once again is my co-host Jesse Barrientos. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you much, Dave.
How you been?
Been fantastic. It's just a gorgeous day out today.
Yes, it is. It's about 80 degrees, but that's the weather. And we're doing legal action, so
yeah, it's fair weather.
Let's talk about debt, which is something that hopefully you're not in very much, but we have a situation in this country where we have just become debt-ridden Americans. Can you talk to why this has happened?
Well, you know, I think the idea is that if people, creditors, or credit card companies are sending people pre-approvals in the mail, especially if somebody's getting out of college, and usually that's what happens, even younger than that. It's, you know, you don't have any money, it's a great incentive. I can use this money, and the thought is always, hey, you know what, I'm going to pay it back before it's due. But we know that rarely happens. Right. And then it's a you know, continuing circle, because then you'll get another card, and then pretty soon it's rob Peter to pay Paul. You're taking advances to getting rid of some of these other debts, and you just keep on going in a circle, and right. It's tough. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you know your cards are maxed out, and you don't know what you're going to do. Right.
It seems like we have a lot of keeping up with the Joneses out there, where you know, neighboritis. You see what a neighbor has, you see what a friend has, and you want to acquire it. You might not have the ability to pay for it right now, but you've got these offers coming in constantly for credit, whether it's pre-approved or otherwise, and it's very tempting. People are taking advantage of these offers, and then they're compounding on it by taking additional offers, and before you know it, the minimum payments on all the cards are incredibly difficult to make.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, it's America, Dave. Everybody wants what everybody else has. You know, I see my neighbor come in and he's got a nice shiny new Cadillac, and you know, so I need something a little bit better, like I don't know, maybe an Infiniti, right? And you know, yeah. You see a lot of things out there. You know, those kind of incentives, and people, you know, for example, for leasing those things. You know, you're able to lock into something that that appears to be a low price. But, you know, nobody ever reads the fine print on those things.
So there's just this mentality that I want it now, I'll pay for it later. And now we're just talking about credit. We're not even talking about the other debt-ridden problems in this country with lack of health insurance,
right?
Acquiring vehicles that they can't possibly afford, getting into homes that they can't afford, you know, absent some kind of circumstances that allows their income to improve over time. And again, all this stuff is very tempting.
Right.
To get that house that maybe you shouldn't squeeze yourself into financially, to get the car that really doesn't make sense to pay $400, $500, $600 a month in a car payment when you might only be making $1,500 or $2,000 a month. So it's more than just the credit cards, is it not?
It is, but I mean, hey, you know, got to get to work somehow, Dave, and I can't get to work in my jalopy, right?
That's true.
We did a show not so long ago about the mortgage crisis, because you mentioned that with respect to this, and a lot of people are in trouble because of that. But you know, you have the situation where you're able, or you think you're able, to get into to buy your own property. Again, that really is the American dream, to own your own home. And
well, the mortgage industry told you you were.
Right. Exactly.
They approved you.
So you must be.
And they didn't even want to see much documentation.
No, but then they told me what? Okay, hey, they didn't really emphasize that, you know, I'm gonna, you know, that the rate is going to change in a couple of years, and that's what really happens then. So hey, I'm able to afford it at this rate. Now all of a sudden the arm kicks in and the rates change, and now you know I have to pay a whole lot more than I was before, and it's just way beyond my means. You're essentially
they might have glossed over that fact, but they certainly illustrated that historically housing will continue to increase by 5 to 7% per year. You can always refinance again when the rates come down, or tap into home equity.
You could, except right for the problem is that you've had those credit cards, and now you got yourself in a little over your head, because again, you buy the house, you're cash poor, something happens, you need a new furnace, or something else happens in the house, a water heater, whatever, and you don't have it, so you go and you use the credit card because that's really the only choice that you have, and it just builds on, you know, on one thing after another.
Okay, so we know we have a problem. Let's talk about the solution. What is one common way to get out of debt?
Well, of course, one common way is to pay it, right? Is to be financially responsible and to manage your money and to not go beyond your means. But realistically, you know, I mean, when you're talking about would be a bankruptcy.
What type of bankruptcy?
Chapter 7 or Chapter 13, it really depends on the specific circumstances. How much you're making, how much equity you have, what the other your assets and liabilities are, and well, with
My understanding is Chapter 7 is for someone who doesn't have significant assets, and they need a fresh start, and most of their debt is either unsecured credit cards, medical bills, personal loans, things like that. So they really don't have anything to liquidate. Therefore, the court grants them the fresh start. Is that basically how a Chapter 7 works?
That's basically how it works. You have some restrictions with respect to the amount of income that you can have for the amount of people that are living in the household. But that's basically, it's essentially a fresh start.
Okay, so Chapter 7 is a fresh start.
Right.
Still not something you want to do unless you absolutely have to.
That's true. And just kind of on the side of things, some people talk about, they come in and they say, hey, is it going to mess up my credit? Well, by the time you come in, your credit is already so messed up that it really is not going to make a difference. People can't just put their head in the sand. You have to take charge. If there's a problem, an issue in your life, financial or otherwise, you have to deal with it. If you ignore it, it's not going to go away. I assure you, it's probably just going to get bigger.
Well, that's what's amazing about this whole debt situation is the credit, which might have led them into debt in the first place, is the very first thing they mention when they come to see us about debt relief.
Right.
When can I get credit again?
That's exactly
How will my
right.
credit be affected? Well, it just caused you into this situation, so let's get you out of debt first,
Right.
and then worry about rebuilding.
They also want to keep some of their credit cards, which, fine, you can keep it, you just can't use it.
Right.
So, that's the very first thing that they're looking at.
How about a person who's in debt, but they do have substantial income, and they do have assets? They've just fallen on hard times, either through job loss,
Sure.
illness, divorce, and now they've rehabilitated themselves where they can start to pay, but for that big arrearage that they're carrying around on their back at high interest rate. What can that kind of debtor do?
They can do a Chapter 13, which is a consolidation, essentially. That's really the only consolidation. You hear a lot of commercials, or see a lot of commercials that talk about, call us and we'll get the creditors off your back and do all this other stuff. And you know what? My experience has not been so good with that. But what I can tell you with respect to Chapter 13, we're talking about federal bankruptcy law. You're protected by the full faith and credit of the United States. It's the law. And so, it will certainly get the creditors off of your back. But, again, it's a repayment plan. It's based upon the available money that you have after your allowable expenses. And that generally determines how much you're going to pay per month to the trustee to pay those bills. Actually, to expand a little more on that, it's essentially just like one big basket here. All your debts just generally go right here. And you make monthly payments that generally come out of your check, and they go to the trustee, and the trustee pays first the secured creditors, and then who have to be paid off.
What's a secured
completely.
creditor?
Secured creditor would be something that the credit is secured with. For example, your house. You have a mortgage on a house, so the payment you're promised to pay is secured by the actual house itself. That's why you have foreclosure.
Your vehicle would be secured
Your
as well?
vehicle would be secured as well.
Because if you don't make the payment, they'll repossess the vehicle?
Exactly.
Okay.
Generally they will. And so, other unsecured would be like credit cards, would be like the medical bills, those kinds of things.
What's the time frame for the repayment plan under Chapter 13 of the Bankruptcy Code?
It could be 36 or 60 months or any place in between, to depend upon how much you're able to pay off in your situation. They might extend it throughout the whole thing. I mean, they could do anything from maybe a 10%, and that means of your unsecured creditors. So let's say you owe $100,000. So 10% of that would be what?
$10,000.
$10,000 over the course of the plan. But you got to make sure that you continue to do what you're supposed to do with those plans, which is to fund it, to pay it. Sometimes people get into trouble when they don't, and that's generally why it comes out of their check.
How do they get the creditors to accept this payment arrangement through the court?
Well, I don't think that that's what the court dictates. The plan is accepted by the trustee. The trustee looks over that information, and sometimes, a lot of times, they'll have to tweak the plan. Just for an example, unless it is a mandatory contribution to a pension plan, okay, if you're putting money in, you have to stop it if it's voluntary. So
you really need to
that's
dedicate
extra money.
all of your disposable income for the next 3 to 5 years towards the repayment of either all or a portion of this debt.
Exactly, and you'll be living a little, a little thin.
3 to 5 years is a long time to live on a tough budget, but it's also a long period of time to be able to stretch out your debt. So I guess there's a balance there, is there
Sure.
not?
And also, if you're not paying the whole thing back, and also to be able to keep your house, and also to be able to keep your car, and also to be able to keep a little sanity in your marriage.
Right. But your lifestyle does need to change. The credit will be gone.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be able to tap those credit
Right.
cards. You're not going to be able to eat out as much or have that much in entertainment that you might have had that led you into debt.
Right.
So things have to change from that standpoint, which could be difficult on people who have never had to make that change in their life.
They sure do. And, unfortunately, what you see is, repetitive again, a circle. People, they get out and they just can't get beyond their old lifestyle habits.
So by way of review, we have 2 chapters under the Bankruptcy Code that could apply.
To individuals, right?
Chapter 7, Fresh Start, and a Chapter 13, Bill Consolidation through the Court.
Correct.
How do you know when you meet with somebody as to what chapter they qualify for? How do you gauge that?
Well, it really depends upon, there's a lot of factors, but just generally it depends upon, how much equity they have in their home. It depends upon whether or not they have disposable income after the allowable expenses, all right? It depends upon income, and by the way, even if just one person is filing, just one spouse, you still have to take into account the other spouse's income in the calculation of the plan and everything else. But you can also, of course, too, take into consideration those expenses as well. So if she has a car or he has a car and it's not on yours, but you're paying it, that all gets considered. That's why it's, sometimes people complain about the questionnaire form. It's long, it's detailed, but in order to be able to make an intelligent and accurate assessment, we need to know those specifics in order to advise them appropriately to see, number one, whether or not they're available or they're eligible for Chapter 7, and number two, if they are, for which chapter.
Right. It seems with the foreclosure crisis and the subprime meltdown, more and more people have either lost their house, subject to losing their house, or in the process of it. Chapter 13 bankruptcy, is that a way to save the house from going into foreclosure or from losing it in a sheriff's sale?
It sure is. Let's say, for example, you've delayed because you put your head in the sand, and
I thought things would get better.
You thought things would get better, and they generally get worse.
I thought the market would turn around when the spring came, and all of a sudden my house would just sell.
Well, and it will turn around in the spring, just not this spring.
Right.
Okay,
maybe
not
several
next one.
springs.
Exactly, and it will come back. I don't have any doubts about that. But if let's say your sheriff's sale is next week, okay, as long as you come in and we're able to complete the petition, and a lot of most cases we're able to do that. You have some things that you have to gather and information that you have to give for us. So as long as we have all those things, we can absolutely stop the sheriff's sale.
Is it ironic or coincidental, rather, that the government is pushing the mortgage companies to work with the homeowners, reworking loans, forbearance agreements? You don't hear much talk about Chapter 13 as a method to repay the creditors and keep your home. Isn't that a win-win for everybody?
Well, the thing is, it's one of those ultimate terms. When you hear bankruptcy, it doesn't matter which chapter, people automatically assume, failure. Hey, I wasn't a success. I failed. Look what happened. I don't want to do this. I really want to pay my bills, but I really can't. And it's just one of those things that, unfortunately, has this connotation, this negative connotation associated with it. But for a lot of people, that's really the only option. I mean, it'd be great if you could do a forbearance. It'd be great if you could rework. And the truth is that a lot of these people that come in have gone that route, and it's still not working. And it might be because of something major or traumatic, like an illness, the loss of employment, and now I'm an older person and I can't, nobody's going to hire me, and I've been looking for the past year. And
people still have to make the payments under a Chapter 13, which is the tough part. They need to make their regular mortgage payment again if they have a home, first and second, and they need to make the trustee payment. So I kind of liken it to a diet. If I give you a diet to follow, when you go home and you eat whatever you want, you don't follow the diet, it's not going to work.
Right.
And Chapter 13 won't work unless you continue to pay everybody on time, which you haven't done for years. So you really have to change your whole mindset, your methodology, the way you live your life. But it can be done, and it can be a lifesaver and a home saver.
Exactly.
And I've seen it time and time again.
Exactly right. And I mean, and that's true whether or not it's Chapter 13 or Chapter 7. You can save your house. A lot of people don't know in a Chapter 7. The only caveat is you really have to be caught up on those mortgage payments. You have to, you can't be behind. And I know that sounds, probably some people out there are thinking, oh, what are you talking about? Well, a lot of times people, hey, that's not the problem. They've kept up the house because that's what's important to them. They have to provide a roof over, over the heads for their wife and for their children.
But they've used the credit cards for living
And they've used the credit
expenses.
cards, exactly. And so now we have a situation where, okay, now, wow, I'm maxed out. I can't take another thing out of it. And so, the Chapter 7, and again, it depends upon the particular circumstances of each case. You're going to have to look at those things, and you would be able to do that and save the house, but discharge the other debt, and that would be completely.
Amazingly, a lot of people don't realize that they're in trouble until they cannot make the minimum payment anymore. They could have 10 credit cards with $100,000 worth of debt, but as long as they're able to make the minimum payment, they will tell me that they have A1 credit. So what? You're $100,000 in debt. I don't care if you have A1 credit
Or not.
You got to eliminate that debt. So sometimes it takes either a wage garnishment or a judgment
Sure.
or constant creditor harassment for people to actually wake up and say, yeah, I'm in trouble. I need some help. 7 or 13 might be an option for me.
All right, and you mentioned certainly creditor harassment, and well, of course, they probably have some other ideas about that, but they'll call you at home, they'll call you at work, they'll call you, they'll bother you. People get so stressed out because of that.
But there's ways to get the creditors to stop that a lot of people don't know about.
Sure.
And you don't have to buy a book that someone is touting on the cable TV about 2 words that have to be spoken. I'm not going to mention any names,
Right.
but there are certain things that you have protection from under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act that you can do as a consumer to stop the harassment. And one, I'll give it away, it's not a big deal. Send them a letter telling them to cease. Once it's in writing, they cannot bother you. Now, they can still try and collect on the judgment. They can still sue you, but they can't call you. They can't write to you. They can't do anything
But
to you.
my experience has been, legally, but my experience has been they will continue to do that. Sometimes even after bankruptcy is filed, which
true.
is an automatic stay. They'll continue. I've at least on a couple of occasions have filed a rule to show cause. And after they get that and they kind of see what the penalties are and everything else,
Right.
then it's a different tune.
Not only that, there's attorneys that will sue under the Fair Debt Collection Practices
Absolutely.
Act, and they'll receive $1,000 per violation plus attorney's fees if you can prove that a creditor harassed your client after they were notified or after they had attorney representation. So a lot of creditors are pretty rogue about this, but there are attorneys that will go after them, and they'll get slapped.
Yeah, and you just got to find the right one.
Yeah. All right, so we're out of debt now, right?
Yep.
We've either eliminated it through a Chapter 7 or we have consolidated it through Chapter 13. 3 to 5 years has run. We've paid it off. We want to get back on our feet. How do we rebuild ourselves now that we've eliminated our debt?
Well, I mean, it's going back to the basics, all right? But the very first thing you have to do is to pay your bills on time, okay? Once you have a history and you've established it, certainly for 6 months, and then for a year, and then for a year and a half, and then for 2 years, what's going to happen is you're going to look more attractive from a credit perspective. That means you can't have any late pays. That means that a lot of people, and it's funny, will say, okay, well, my mortgage isn't due until the 15th. Well, no. It's due on the 1st. Exactly right. It's due on the 1st, okay? Pay it on the 1st because it's due on the 1st. You have that grace period. But a lot of people just continue to push the envelope of that.
Actually, if you pay it within the grace period, you won't be reported
Right.
late on your credit
Exactly
bureau.
right.
But it's a good habit to get into, to have it ready on the 1st.
Right, and that's what it is. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a lifestyle change. We're talking about habits and routines. So, how do you change an old habit? Okay, well, in order to get different results, you have to try something different. If every time you mix flour and water together, right, and you get, pizza dough, all right, you have to be a little crazy to think that this time I'm going to mix flour and water together and, I'm going to get a meatball sandwich. Okay, it's just, if you want something different, okay, if you want different results, you have to try something different. And so changing your routine, changing that, getting into the habit of that, it's just like writing the mileage down on your car. If you're doing that and you're deducting that on your taxes,
Sure.
Hey, it takes a while to get in the habit of that. All right, every time you pull out the little log, you write your start, you write your finish, and you write, where you're going, and put it back. Then when you stop, you write it down. I mean, you just have to get into the habit.
Pay your bills on time.
Pay your bills on time.
Don't incur any negative credit after getting out of debt.
Exactly.
So if you have a $140 medical bill, and in the past it was one you kind of just threw to the side because it wasn't that important, pay that.
Pay it, or make arrangements. I mean, just because you owe a bill doesn't mean they're going to, give it to the credit reporting agencies. It's only because you haven't paid it after several requests that happens.
Sure. Let's talk about the credit report, because that is the basis for obviously getting credit in the future, being able to purchase a home, an auto, things like that at a decent rate.
Sure.
Once you're out of debt, you want to pull those credit reports to do what?
You want to make sure that there's no, first of all, I mean, it's always a good idea to look at it, and we're talking about Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, the three major credit reporting agencies. And, they may not all have the same information on you. You want to make sure that the information is accurate, that it's not, stale, because if it's been there for a certain amount of time, it should be wiped off. And you're also entitled to provide an explanation. For example, let's say in a divorce, there's some debts there, whatever, that he was supposed to have and pay for them, and he hasn't, or she hasn't, or whatever. You can provide them with an explanation. The bottom line is, without going into too much of that, you can write those agencies, and they have an obligation to investigate. I think we did a show on that too. But
right.
That's what you want to do. You want to look at everything to make sure, and also to protect your your identity too. You want to make sure that there's stuff on there that's not being attributable to you, that somebody has stolen your identity and
right.
is using.
A lot of people don't realize too that you can do the dispute now online.
Yes.
It used to be you had to send it in writing, and there would be a time period, a lag period. Now you can go right online to the credit bureau's websites, find the dispute button, and log your dispute right there. And also, we should mention getting your credit reports. You can do that once per year.
Once a year for free.
For free at www.annualcreditreport.com. And what I recommend you do is you pull one of the credit bureaus every 4 months. That way you constantly have an updated version of a credit report, so you can see if you're being attacked. So you don't have to wait a year to get all three. You can systematically pull it throughout the course of a year. What about auto financing? Everybody needs a car, especially if you live in the suburbs, which is where this is airing, to get to work, to take care of your family. What should you look for in auto financing once you've eliminated your debt and you've come out and you're ready to get a car again?
Well, you want to look at, first you want to look at,
or should you lease? Let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk first. You need to be within your budget, and
Okay.
within your means. So
forget the Infinity.
Forget the Infinity for now.
Okay.
I suppose. Okay, but hey, you can go and see what you have. Basically, what you need. People need dependable transportation, something that's going to get them to point A and point B, to work and back, without having to worry that it's going to break down, without having to worry that it's not going to start in the cold and all that stuff. So you want to make sure that you have you're within your. And there are a lot of reasonably priced vehicles out there. People just want, hey, I know it's reasonably priced, Dave, but really, I really like that Infinity. I really want that. So you need to look at that. You also need to look at special deals that are available. And
Such as?
Well, sometimes, and this is where it gets into leasing or otherwise. Sometimes, let's just talk about purchasing. Sometimes there'll be there's no finance charges, but it's for a certain period of time. You have to look at the fine print. Every time you see that on television, there's a little print that goes across there that's really, really small, and it only flashes up there for couple of seconds there, and you really can't can't really see it. So you want to make sure. If you have TiVo, I guess you could stop it and look at it. But you want to make sure about those specific terms.
But realistically, on an auto, you can expect a higher than normal interest rate if you've gone through a bankruptcy.
If you've gone through a bankruptcy. But also, here's you're not stuck with having to do the financing from the dealership. You could check with your bank.
Right.
Especially if you've established your credit, you've got a little bit of savings, you've got your home mortgage with them, and you might want to see shop around for rates. It can never hurt you to shop around for the best rate for something like that.
And it's very possible you kept your vehicle through the bankruptcy by just continuing to make your payments on it, which is called reaffirming a debt.
Right.
But if you haven't, if you can get a little bit further away from the bankruptcy, the farther you can stretch out from it, your interest rate should come down as long as you haven't incurred any more negative credit. Is that correct?
That's correct. And as long as you've been doing what you're supposed to do, as long as you've changed your lifestyle and your habits, then it's only going to get better from there.
Well, nobody wants to sleep in their car. So what about buying a house after getting out of debt? What's the likelihood of doing that? Because that's number one or number two on everybody's list. Can I get a home and when?
You can get a home, and again, the only difference is going to be the interest rate, and that's where sometimes a lot of people will go to brokers. I always suggest, I don't care, try your local bank first, You know, if it's a difficulty or an issue because of your credit score and all that other stuff, you know, you might want to look around. But you really want to be very careful when you shop around for a broker to make sure you get somebody that's reputable, somebody that's honorable, you know, and understand what you're doing. So you might want to, you know,
Sure.
seek some help for that.
Right. I happen to know a very reputable broker, and he would never steer anybody
Right.
into a bad deal that they couldn't afford. He'll even pound them over the head
Sure.
if they think they can afford something that they can't. But you're right; they should explore all options.
Right.
Read the fine print, understand what the terms are, understand if it's going to adjust.
Right.
How much
big
can
thing.
it adjust, and try and live within your means.
Right.
Try and pick a house that you can actually afford to keep, and not put too much of your disposable income towards it each month.
You know, there are good and bad in every profession. So, you know, that just kind of goes without saying. I did want to mention something real quick. We didn't just kind of digressing for a second. We just talked about purchasing a car. Didn't talk about the lease option. You know, people understand when you lease a car, you don't own it. You're just leasing it. And there's at the end of
You're paying for the use of it.
you're paying for the use of it.
For the length of that term.
Exactly. And when that term is up, whether or not it's 2 years, 3 years, 36 months, you know, you have to bring it back, and there's an inspection. And if there's any damages, again, you know, you might have to pay. If you've gone over your mileage, you might have to pay for that. It can be a good thing for a lot of people, but again, that's something you have to really explore because they'll have really good deals. You can, you know, for a couple $100, you'll be able to get a lease. Sometimes you'll have to put money down, sometimes not. But again, you still come to the same issue with respect to, you know, paying a higher interest rate if you've had a credit issues.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls briefly that you want to avoid after getting out of debt. The most obvious one is correct whatever problem or flaw that you had, whether it be lack of insurance,
Sure.
Overspending, inability to keep a job. Rectify some of
wanna
those
try to do that, right?
issues that have caused you the problem in the first place so that you don't fall back into debt. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, one of the biggest things too, I would say, and I know it's difficult and it's expensive, but in insurance, even if it's just basic, you know, catastrophic insurance, I mean, with a huge deductible, because you know what, $10,000 versus, you know, $100,000. God forbid something should happen.
Sure.
Right. So I mean, you wanna be able to do that, especially if you've had those issues before.
What about credit cards? Because inevitably they're going to get inundated with offers for credit. Clients even receive offers when they're in a Chapter 13,
Sure.
which is ridiculous, but they do. They take them. So what do you do about these credit card offers?
You want to avoid it. You want to avoid those things. And you know what you want to do too? You want to, when you get those things, you know, I would invest. I'd spend the money. That's okay. You guys can. Invest in a shredder, cross-cut shredder, confetti cut shredder rather.
Diamond cut.
Diamond cut, confetti, whatever, just that small. And you know what? Anything that comes in like that, or you know, any stuff with your personal information on it, right? You want to get rid of it. You want to shred it up. You know, that's how you got into problems in the first place. I mean, credit cards are a valuable tool in the right hands. If you're dedicated and disciplined about that, you can use somebody else's money for 30 days and have use of that. But the thing is, you got to pay it back within that time. Otherwise, it does you know, again, that's what you're paying. You're going to get yourself back in the hole again. But you know, try to avoid it. And you know, unless you're around, then
Excellent advice. Well, you've taken us from debt, out of debt, back into rebuilding. Jesse Barrientos, thanks for joining me today.
You bet. You're
And you've
welcome.
been watching Legal Action. We'll see you next time. Take care.
that's pretty good.